Whenever I give speeches, I do this experiment where I ask everyone in the audience to turn to the person next to them and ask and answer one question. When is the last time you cried in front of another person? There's 10,000 engineers in the room. And then I ask, who's excited about this? And nobody's excited, right? They all think this is going to be terrible. And then I ask them how it went. How many people had a better conversation than you expected? Every hand goes up. We're bad at anticipating how conversations will go.
Right.
But the more we have them, the better our prognostication becomes.
From the news team at LinkedIn, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. It's our show about the changing nature of work and how that work is changing us. I learned one of my most important lessons about communication when I was about 7 years old. I got into this fight with my sister. She was probably 4, give or take, and I got so frustrated with her that I just walloped her. Now she started crying, and I was a bigger kid than her. I'm not proud of it. I hurt her, and so I apologized. She cried harder, and I apologized again. So she ran and told Mom, and I ran and said to Mom, "Hey, I'm sorry." I told her I was sorry. And she said to me, "Well, it doesn't matter what you said to her. It matters what she heard." Now, this is one of the most important lessons in communication, right? It matters not what you said, but what another person heard. My question for today's episode is this: can we become better at engineering what other people hear? Our guest today, of course, believes you can. His name is Charles Duhigg. Charles is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. He is a best-selling author, and he's a longtime friend. His latest book is called Supercommunicators. Now, it won't surprise you to learn that Charles is an exceptional conversationalist. He's a lot of fun to talk to and a lot of fun to listen to. And it's my hope that when this conversation is done, wherever you are starting from, you also will be a super communicator. Here's Charles. I'm in the business of communicating, and you're in the business of communicating.
Why don't we communicate together?
Well, listen, I am very interested in this idea that you believe that we can all become excellent communicators. I don't.
Okay. You're not certain that anyone can become a super communicator. And I'll try and convince you to the alternative, and you can tell me if it works. And let's define what a super communicator is. So I have a question for you. If you were having a bad day and you came home and you wanted to call someone and you know talking to them would just make you feel better, do you know who you would call?
My best friend, Heather.
There you go. So for you, Heather is a super communicator, and you are probably a super communicator back to her. Now, that doesn't mean that you or Heather are super communicators all the time.
Sure.
But there's something that's happening. Heather knows how to ask you questions the right way. She knows how to show you that she's listening to you. She has some script in her head that she's not even aware of this is how I speak to Jessi. The difference with consistent super communicators, because we're all super communicators at some point, right?
Sure.
But the people who can do it consistently are the ones who recognize Heather has a set of skills that she uses with you, and you can use those skills with anyone. If I treat the stranger on the bus like I treat my friend, we are going to feel connected to each other.
I get that. And it also feels to me like, let's take Heather. I know how to listen to Heather so that she feels listened to.
Absolutely.
Right? I also know that when I call my sister, Katya, I need a different set of skills. Right? That set of skills I use with Heather, they don't work with Katya. So it feels to me like part of the game is being able to decode and identify what the skills are and switch them up on command.
I think at the broadest level, they're very similar skills, and the way that we use them and we implement them changes, right? From Heather to your sister, you know that you have a level of familiarity. You basically have a set of habits with Heather.
Sure.
And your habits with your sister are different. And if suddenly you were to treat your sister like Heather, your sister would say like, this is weird. What are you doing? Like, why are you talking that way? But there are these core skills that we know from research and we know from data at the core of communication. And the question is, how do we adapt them?
Yeah. So you, in your seminal book on communication, you make a case for 3 conversations or forms of conversation. And I think it's actually a structure that can be a great starting point for talking about how we do this well.
Absolutely. So, and in part, this began in my own life.
Yeah.
That I fell into this bad pattern with my wife where I'd come home and I would complain about my day. And she would give me some good advice. She would say, like, why don't you take your boss out to lunch and you guys can get to know each other a little bit better? And instead of being able to hear her advice, I would get more upset.
Yes.
Right?
We're all nodding here.
Yeah,
we're
exactly.
All like, yes,
exactly.
Yes.
Every relationship.
I didn't ask you to tell me what to do. I asked you to be like, yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. Oh, you're the best. I'm sorry, honey. So I went to these researchers and I asked them, like, why do I keep falling into this trap? And in general, most conversations tend to fall into one of the three buckets. There's these practical conversations. Here's a problem, help me solve it. There's emotional conversations where I tell you what I'm feeling. And I don't want you to solve my feelings. I want you to empathize.
Right.
And then there's social conversations about how we relate to each other in society. And what we know is that if two people are having different conversations at the same time, they cannot hear each other.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard to understand what the other person's trying to say.
So it seems to me like some people are better than others at picking up on when a conversation moves from one type to another.
I think there's people who practice it. What all the research tells us is that this is not an inborn trait, right? We tend to think that we have these expressions like he has the gift of the gab, or he was born like with a silver tongue. And what we've learned is that the best communicators, if you ask them if they've always been good communicators, they inevitably say no. I had trouble making friends in high school, so I had to study how kids talk to each other, or my parents got divorced and I had to be the peacemaker between them.
Right.
It's the act of thinking about communication that makes you a better communicator. So you're exactly right. There are some people who are better at this. They're better at picking up on what you really want to talk about, intuiting like what's going on in your head.
Right.
But it's not because they're born with a different brain. It's because they have simply learned, I need to pay attention to this. I need to practice this.
Right. Well, you have to perceive the fact that there's something for you to practice in the first place.
That's exactly right.
And I think we all know, and many of us work with folks who don't even seem to perceive that.
That's right.
And I'd be very interested in your take on how we can have better conversations with people in our workplaces, particularly people that we struggle with.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, because I think particularly, and you know this data better than I do, when you look at studies about why people leave jobs or stay with a job, it's always the other people around them, right? My boss was driving me crazy, or my best friend works here now, and so I want to work with them. What do we do when someone's bad at this? I'll answer it in a little bit of a roundabout way, which is a question that people often ask me is, what happens when I go to a party and I meet someone and I keep asking them questions, and they answer the questions, they're enthusiastic, but they never ask me a question back. So researchers have looked at this. What's going on there? And what they found is that there's one thing you can say that changes everything, which is you can say, I've been asking you so many questions. You probably have some questions for me. Let me go ahead and let you. And then what you find is that they have dozens of questions that they want to ask you, but they're completely unpracticed at doing so. They don't have a habit around question asking.
Unpracticed.
And some people just don't want to connect, right? Some people want to code on their computer and be left alone. But let's assume for a moment that someone does want to connect, or at least they're open to connecting.
Sure.
The best thing that we can do is we can guide them, if we're having trouble getting through, guide them to what we want to talk about and ask them what matters to them. And this is where one of the skills comes up that we know are associated with good communicators is A, asking more questions, but B, asking a certain kind of question, a deep question.
A deep question.
A deep question. And a deep question is something that asks about your values or your beliefs or your experiences.
Right. It's inviting vulnerability.
It's inviting vulnerability without necessarily even announcing itself as such. Like an example of a good deep question is if you met someone who's a doctor, instead of asking them, oh, what hospital do you work at? Asking them, oh, what made you decide to go to medical school?
Yeah.
Right. That second question, that doesn't seem like a vulnerable question. It doesn't seem like it's intrusive. But think about what we've done. We've invited this person to tell us about their experiences, about what they value in life,
right?
About where they find happiness during their day. It is a question that allows them to be open with us. And some of that might be vulnerable and some of that might be just interesting and fun.
Right.
But we've opened the door.
Right. Where does vulnerability fit into the mix when we're trying to communicate well?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. And I'll say most of the time people misunderstand what vulnerability is. So vulnerability has a very specific definition in neuroscience. It is a cascade of neural reactions that occurs when I tell you something that you could judge. Now, I might not care about your judgment. I might tell you I like Star Trek better than Star Wars. And you might think that's the dumbest thing you've ever heard in your entire life. And I don't care. It's not that big a deal.
Right.
But the act of me telling you something that you could judge sets off an anticipation in my brain.
Right.
And if you, instead of judging me, if you tell me something that I could judge about you,
Right.
that's when vulnerability occurs. And in that moment, we cannot help but trust each other a little bit more. It's literally hardwired into our brain by evolution.
It feels to me that trust is the crucial step to true communication, to moving beyond speaking to getting to the heart of whatever it is you're trying to.
Absolutely. And let's define what trust is, because I think sometimes we say trust and people think, oh, this has to be like, I'm giving you my ATM code, right? Right? But it's not. Trust can be as simple as, if I bring up a topic, Jessi's not going to make me feel dumb, right? I trust that we have a basic sort of understanding that we want the other person to enjoy this conversation, to participate in this conversation. That's really all we need.
Okay, so what I'm most interested in is how to repair. You go into the office you have with the people that you work with, who maybe you've worked with for a few years, and you have baggage with them and things that haven't worked out. And you're often walking into these conversations a few steps behind, right?
You're working from a deficit.
So how, when you're working from a deficit, do you set the stage for collaboration, real communication?
So I think the most important thing is to acknowledge it, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that happens with conversations, and there's a guy named Nick Epley at University of Chicago who studied this, is that we are very bad at anticipating how a conversation will go. Turns out we always think a conversation is going to be more awkward and harder than it really is. We think that if we bring up something sensitive, the other person's going to overreact.
Yes.
So if you and I have some tension between us and we sit down and we have a meeting, we're both going to pretend like the tension doesn't exist. We're not going to reference it. We're not going to say like, hey, look, sorry, we disagreed on that thing, but let's talk. And it's the act of not acknowledging it that makes it even more powerful. So the number one thing that we can do is to sit down and say, hey, like, we're not as close as I wish we were.
Yeah.
We could talk about that. And I'd love to work on getting closer. And we have this project. Let's take a blank slate on this project. And you'll notice really good CEOs, really good leaders, they do this a lot. They acknowledge it's not, I'm going to overpower you. It's not, we're going to pretend it doesn't exist. Here's something that we don't see eye to eye, but let's talk about this now.
Yeah.
And that can take a lot of the tension out.
It does take the tension out.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what happens when you move from type of conversation to type of conversation.
Yeah.
How do you, how can you anticipate where you're going and meet the moment?
In some respects, you don't even have to anticipate as much as just ask. And there's an interesting, you mentioned before that you have to give to get, right?
Right.
One of the nice things about deep questions is that it's very natural if I ask you a deep question to then answer it myself. Oh, why'd you go to medical school? Oh, that's interesting. I went to law school because, right? Suddenly we're in a place where we're trying to align.
Right.
And let's say I ask you, why'd you go to medical school? Someone in the sort of practical mindset might say, oh, I just wanted a good job. Like I wanted a job that I knew there was always going to be demand for. And it seems like you always get hired as a doctor. Okay, that's kind of a practical thing. I can match that. But let's say the same person in a different the different setting says, I saw my dad get sick when I was 7 and I wanted to be one of those healers that helped him.
Right.
Okay, that person's in a more emotional mindset and I can match them there.
Right.
And once we've matched each other, we will often almost subconsciously move from type of conversation to type of conversation. This, again, is a product of our neurology, how our brains have evolved.
We just match each other in the same way that if we went for a run and we were equal runners, we might shift our cadences as we ran and not even notice it.
Well, and it's not just our brains. It's our bodies. In this conversation, without us realizing it, you and I, we're breathing at the same rate. Mm-hmm. Our heart rates have started to match each other.
Right.
Even the dilation of our pupils are now more similar than they were when we started this conversation.
And it's probably actually a way more critical component to a good communication interaction than whatever words are coming out of our mouths, right?
Absolutely. To your mom's point, it's what they remember hearing rather than what you said that matters.
Right. Here I'm thinking about another, again, just theory I have.
Okay.
And that is that the emotional conversation is where all good work is done. And so no matter where I start with anybody, I will always try to pilot there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we almost make this mistake where we think that a lot of our conversations aren't emotional.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth of the matter is emotions influence every discussion, whether you acknowledge them or not, right?
Yeah.
We're old friends and
Yep.
we like each other. And that liking each other, that feeling safe with each other, that's influenced how you and I relate to each other.
Completely.
Emotions are at the core of how we communicate with other people. And you're exactly right. Being deliberate about that, moving a conversation to a place where you say, how do you feel about that?
Yeah.
That's gold.
I find it's particularly useful in moments where you don't expect a conversation to become emotional.
Yes.
So when you can cue into the larger story you talked about, well, why did you go to medical school, right? Try saying that to your boss or some version of that to your boss, right?
Yeah.
Not always easy to do, though. And also, I suspect, very gendered.
Oh, that's interesting. So I'll tell you what the research says.
Yeah.
Because Nick Epley, he's looked at this gendered question a lot around deep questions. And what he's found is that there is not a gendered difference in how the question is heard.
Right.
There is a gendered difference in how the question is asked inside the questioner's head. So what he's found is, and again, it's not because we have different brains, it's because we are habituated differently.
Socialized from birth.
Yeah, exactly. That oftentimes women will hesitate before asking a deep question of their boss because they are more worried about how that person will react.
Okay.
And men will go ahead and ask the question because we've never learned to have to worry about that.
Yeah.
Now, the truth of the matter is that for the boss, the question from your female employee versus your male employee, it hits you the same way. You react the same way. So it's more in the questioner's mind that we see this gender difference. And you're right.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's super. It does seem hard, right? It seems hard, except, so whenever I give speeches, I do this experiment where I ask everyone in the audience, they don't do it right away, we work up to it, to turn to the person next to them and ask and answer one question. And that question is, when is the last time you cried in front of another person? Now, these are big trade conferences, right? There's 10,000 engineers in the room. And then I ask, who's excited about this? And nobody's excited, right? They all think this is going to be terrible.
Right.
And when research has been done, what people say is this is going to be very awkward and I'm not going to feel close to the person afterwards. I'm going to feel like
I want to steer away from them at coffee hour.
And then I ask everyone in the audience to do this. We spend 2 minutes per person. And then I ask them how it went. How many people had a better conversation than you expected? Every hand goes up.
Yeah.
Right? How many of you feel close to that person you just spoke to? Every hand goes up. For how many of you was that less awkward than you thought it was going to be? Every hand goes up.
Yeah.
We're bad at anticipating how conversations will go.
Right.
But the more we have them, the better our prognostication becomes.
It also reveals something else to me, which is, I suspect, and again, you're the one with the research, so just completely call my bluff on all this stuff, right? But I suspect that when we are honest with each other about all sorts of things, regardless of whether that honesty is ostensibly good or bad, it opens a pathway whereby we trust each other and like each other more.
Oh, absolutely.
We all spend a lot of time worrying about what everybody around us thinks, which is perhaps really silly because everybody else is just sitting around worrying about what everybody else thinks about them.
Right.
But I remember at one point I went to a self-development conference, like a weekend-long conference, and one of the exercises they had us do, it seemed so horrendous to me, was they said, okay, everybody stand up, and I want you to go line up in front of the person who's the ugliest in the room. And I had this gasp.
Oh, yeah.
And I immediately looked around. But of course, I didn't think, oh, who am I going to stand in front of? I thought, oh, everyone's going to stand in front of me. And then, Charlie, let me tell you, easily more people stood in front of me than anyone else. And I'll tell you why. I, at the time, was very different than everyone else in the room. This was a conference that happened in Charlotte, North Carolina, and most of the people in this conference were in their 30s and 40s, and I was a 25-year-old from San Francisco with a shaved head and a weird belt. I looked very different than everyone else in the room. I knew that. I think I'd been subconsciously carrying that, right?
Yeah.
Everybody lines up in front of me, total freedom. Turns out I didn't care at all.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But as soon as we had opened up that opportunity for complete honesty and communication, got that out of the way, suddenly I felt like I was friends with everyone in the room.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when we're talking to each other, when our bodies start to match each other, our brains become more and more similar. And this is known as neural entrainment. And this is at the core of how communication works, is that I'm basically trying to get you to think the way I think, and you're trying to get me to think the way you think, because that helps us see the world from each other's perspective.
Right.
Although the who's the ugliest person in the room one is a tough one.
Right.
We don't have to agree with other people to entrain with them, to communicate with them, to connect with them. In fact, all that we have to do is understand them and give them a chance to understand us. And then even if we vote for different people, we disagree about everything on earth, we will feel a sense of connection to each other and a sense of trust.
Completely. Okay, so you are a good communicator.
That's very nice of you to say.
Well, and you know that about yourself, I hope. And that is why I want to know, where do you fall down most? Like, where do people who are good at this fall down?
I fall down all the time. So I think I have two kids, 13 and 16, and
would they say you're a good communicator?
I don't know. It's a really good question. So there is this thing. So we talked about different skills. One skill is asking questions, deep questions. Another skill is trying to, at least looking for clues about what kind of conversation you're in and trying to match the other person or invite them to match you. One skill that's really important is proving that we're listening, showing that we're listening. We tend to think of listening as something that's passive. If I just open my ears and close my mouth, you'll know that I'm listening to you. But actually, now that we've done studies on that, we know that's not true at all. Everyone, particularly if it's a tense conversation, in the back of their head, they suspect you're not actually listening. You're waiting your turn to speak.
Yes.
So how do we overcome that? Well, and how do I overcome that with my kids? Because oftentimes they say stuff to me and I just give them advice, right? Or I say, oh, that sounds hard, right? Or, oh, that's good. Good job. You did the right thing. The way that we prove that we're listening is by speaking. It's by asking follow-up questions. It's by restating what we heard them say in our own words. Mm-hmm. In fact, there's this technique that they teach at a bunch of schools known as looping for understanding that has three steps. The first is you ask a question, preferably a deep question. Secondly, once you've answered that question, I'm going to repeat back in my own words what I heard you say, right? And the key here is to show I'm processing it, not mimicry, but actual processing. And most of us do this intuitively. But the third step, and this is what I always forget to do with my kids, is after I repeat that to say, did I get that right? Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah.
Because what I'm actually doing in that moment is I'm asking them for permission to acknowledge that I was listening. Mm-hmm. And I forget to do this all the time, but when you ask your kids for permission, you make them feel empowered and important and like you're paying attention to them.
And heard. And
so I try and remind myself of the three steps of looping for understanding. Right. And that's, I think, where I fall down, is I don't show people that I'm listening as often as I should.
Well, even as you say that, I realize how often I get into that, okay, this thing that I have to add mode.
Yeah, right. And there's this great saying from Maya Angelou, no one remembers what you said, they just remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And it turns out that that's actually true. If you look at transcripts of the best conversations you've ever had, they look like a mess, right? People are speaking over each other. They're interrupting. You bring up an idea and I say, oh, that's interesting. Like the fact that they're messy is why they're so good.
Yeah.
Because it means you're in that conversation. Instead of thinking about like, here's what I have to add. Here's what I want. You're so present in the moment that you're not paying attention to whether what you're about to say is smart or dumb.
Right.
You're just connecting.
Well, so how about great public speakers? Like what do they get right? And do you have to be a great communicator to be a great public speaker?
That's a really good question. No one's asked me that before. I mean, let's take Donald Trump.
Okay.
I'm not a huge fan of Donald Trump, and my guess is you aren't either.
I will tell you I did not vote for him.
Okay, there you go. So I've spent a lot of time at Trump rallies, and I've spent a lot of time with Trump as a reporter. And it's hard to see this when you just see clips of him. What he does from the stage is he proves that he's listening to his audience. If he says something and the crowd just goes wild, he leans into that. He says it again. He repeats it. He riffs on it. He's proving to you, I'm paying attention to you. Mm-hmm. Contrast that with other politicians we know where they have their stump speech and you could clap at one point and not clap at another point. And they're going to stick on that stump speech.
They're reading it from the transcription service behind it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Barack Obama, another great example. Barack Obama, if you notice, who I think is a wonderful communicator, if you notice what he does oftentimes in his speeches is he asks questions. Before telling you what he thinks, he asks a question of you, the audience sitting there. And you don't have the opportunity or the luxury to reply back to him. So what he does is he says, now you might be thinking to yourself. He tries to guess at what your answer is to show you that he's thinking about how you see this thing.
Yeah.
And as a result, we're so much more likely to listen to what he has to say next. So the same skills, whether you're talking one-on-one, whether it's 1-on-4, 1-on-200, the same skills are the skills that make us good communicators.
Listen, I want to go back to where we started.
Okay.
Which is that I have this gut feeling that this skill in particular, by the way, I think that this skill is the seat of empathy. I think the skill is the critical skill for leadership.
Absolutely.
I think it is the way that we stay relevant amid the machines.
Absolutely.
And if my parents were inviting me to learn how to code, I feel like this is the skill that I want to push on my children. And I'm curious what you think about that.
I absolutely agree. I mean, look, if you think about what AI is going to do to our workplaces, if you think about what as the nation's economy changes, and it's kind of unclear how it's going to change right now, but it's definitely going to change.
Yeah.
It is not clear that any one skill, hard skill, is essential, right? It used to be if you learned to code, you were guaranteed a job for the rest of your life. And right now in Silicon Valley, where I live, if you just know how to code, you are out of work and there is no path forward. So who are the people who are going to succeed in the modern workplace? It's the people who can adapt and the people who can communicate.
Yeah.
Because when I can communicate well, I can learn from you how I need to adapt. I can learn from you what you're looking for. And you might be trying to tell me it, and I might not be hearing it right unless I know how to communicate with you. And when I can speak in a way that you understand me, I can tell you why my skills are useful. I can tell you what I can do for you. Communication has always been humans' superpower. It is the thing that sets Homo sapiens apart from every other species. And our brains have evolved to be really good at communication. And going forward, even as the world changes, it will continue to be our superpower. And it is the thing that makes you valuable and trustworthy and the type of person that you want to be around and hire.
That was Charles Duhigg, a journalist and the best-selling author of Supercommunicators. Now, some solid takeaways from this episode, am I right? First of all, anyone can become a better communicator. Now, I'm going to tell you, I didn't believe this when I sat down with Charles, but I get where he's coming from. Communicating is a skill that anyone, no matter where you're starting, can improve at with practice. The key part there is practice, by the way. You got to practice. Second, Charles invites us to consider that there are 3 types of conversations. There is the practical, the social, and the emotional. And the first key to making sure that your conversation goes well is mirroring the type of conversation that your conversation partner is having. If someone is having an emotional conversation and you respond in a practical way, you're not going to hear each other. It's not going to go well. Finally, and this is an important one, no one knows where a conversation is going when it begins. Not a good conversation anyways. And so you have to keep an open mind. That part can be really hard to do, right? It involves listening, really listening, and then responding in real time based on what you're hearing. That's the opportunity to really up-level what you're doing. Now, we're going to talk about this and so much more on Office Hours this week. I really hope you'll join us. If you haven't been before, well, maybe this is the week you try it. We get together on the LinkedIn news page every Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern. That's me and our senior producer, Sarah Storm. If you can't find us, check the show notes because there's always a link. If this episode meant something to you, I hope you will share it with someone that you care about. And I'll be right back here in the studio next Monday. Thanks for listening. I'm Jessi Hempel.